Welcome to Walking Word Podcast. I'm Jason, and today I wanted to talk to you about something that, oddly enough, this room kind of reminds me of. If you look around, a bunch of little kids' hands prints and everything. But what it reminds me of is a couple of things. So first, in 1 Samuel 15, it's Samuel speaking to Saul. Saul is just messed up big time, and Samuel makes a statement that is oftentimes quoted, which is that rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft and presumption as the sin of idolatry. But a lot of people focus on that rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. And you kind of go, well, that's pretty harsh. I mean, that's a pretty bold statement that rebellion is witchcraft. Witchcraft was so heavily persecuted and scripturally just forbidden. But yet here it is, rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. But I want to point something out. What happens with witchcraft is it can be real. So you will have a result given to somebody through a pact or a relationship with familiar spirits or with demons, or go down the list of things. But in the end, what's actually happening here is that somebody is getting a result that they want outside of the relationship and the will of God. That's kind of the end thing. When we think about witchcraft, that's what's happening, is we're getting a result from the spiritual realm, but we're not doing it through the appropriate channels, as it were. So when it says rebellion is as in witchcraft, that's what it's talking about, because rebellion is what? We know that we are not supposed to do a thing, and we do it. Why? Because it's what we want. And we don't want to wait. We don't want to wait our turn or deny our flesh, deny the things that we want to do, because we want it. And so instead of waiting and appropriately going through the channels that God has ordained, we end up doing it any old way we want. Rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. Now that might explain the first part of why this room reminds me of that verse, because I mean, look at the room. It can be a pretty scary room. It's an abandoned asylum. It's got kids' handprints all over the walls. But the second part of it that reminds me of is in Matthew chapter 18. And Jesus, and I'm going to read it here, he says, "And at that time, the disciples came to Jesus saying, 'Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?' And he called," being Jesus, "a child to him, and he brought him among the disciples. And he said, 'I tell you the truth, unless you turn around and become like this little children, like this little child, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever then humbles himself like this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes a child like this in my name welcomes me.'" So this is the other reason why, and this is the juxtaposition of those two verses. You have a verse that just had somebody do something they weren't supposed to do, Saul. And you have Samuel telling him rebellion is as a sin of witchcraft. Do you not understand what you just did? And then whenever the greatest of the disciples discussion occurs, Jesus pulls a little child in and says, unless you humble yourself like this little child, you're never going to enter the kingdom of heaven. But why is that the reference? Because think about a little child. A little child is solely dependent on the parents. The little child doesn't do things for themselves because the parents are the ones that are providing. And also, the parents are the ones that are putting boundaries, allowing the child to do some things, but not allowing them to do others, making the child wait to receive things that perhaps they would want too early because they don't understand the timeline of things or the required maturity to be able to do certain things. I'm going to give you an example. My daughter, she didn't have a cell phone until she was 13. And even when she had the cell phone at 13, she still did not have social media. So she wasn't on Facebook or Instagram or any of those other things. So she wanted one very badly. But we had told her, no, we want you to wait. And it wasn't because we didn't trust her or anything. It's just, I could list off the statistics of social media and access to them and how detrimental they are to developing children. And I could list off all those things about what we've seen within our own church of, just how bad it can be for the teens of this generation. But what we told her was to wait. until she was 13. And then even when she was allowed to have it, there were certain restrictions. So that's the same thing with us. We are supposed to look to the Heavenly Father and follow what He says. And if He tells us no, we're supposed to not do it. And if He tells us yes, we're supposed to do it. In the same way that Jesus talks about being humble as a little child, meaning that you are going to rely on the Father for what you receive and where you are going. That's the same thing. That's why these two passages in 1 Samuel and also in Matthew work well together. And that's why this room reminds me of that. Because rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. You're getting it without the permission or the involvement of God. And the other way, being a little child, is the opposite of that, where you are humbling yourself and solely relying on God's timeline, on God's sovereignty, on God's provision. That's where you're getting everything you are wanting. And when He says no, you don't do it. That's why it's so great. And that's why Jesus says you got to be like the little kids. So hopefully this is something that will help and encourage you. I invite you to go into my podcast, Walking Word podcast, and listen to some of the other things that I've done. Hopefully it's encouraging to you. And I just want to thank you for listening. God bless.